What's up, good people? Welcome to Casa Chaps, where we talk all things home to interior design and everything in between. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how to style open spaces. This is something that some people struggle with because it's just one open space. How can I demarcate it? How can I make things make sense? Do I just decorate everything the same, or do I separate everything? How can I make sure that it coordinates depending with how the open space is like? So this is what we're going to be discussing in today's episode. I also want to say that I'm speaking from personal experience. I do live in a semi-open space where the living room and the dining room is in one room, but we've managed to make it work, and you definitely can make it work too, because I have a ton of tips here that will definitely make things make sense for you. Number one is to clearly define each area. So the first thing that we did for our living room was to put a rug there that is different from the rug in the dining area. This way, it doesn't only aesthetically make sense, it also physically demarcates these two areas, because you want it to be clear that this is the function of the space and this is a different function of the space, even though they might be in one boundary. An easy way to think about that is that jute rugs might work better in a dining space, and yet other kinds of rugs would work better in a living space. This way, when they're different, number one, they can be different textures. Number two, different patterns. Number three, different colors. All of this really demarcates those two areas. And within one area of the open space, you then want the furniture to coordinate. Whilst you might not want to make everything matchy-matchy, remember we've spoken about that before, you want to add variation and yet still coordinating. So you want your sofa and your separate seating to make sense. You want to add in the dining table or the coffee table that makes sense. But overall, they have to be revolving around one thing. The next thing is to create an intentional floor plan. This is something that's always difficult to nail, because you have to ask yourself, which orientation makes best with how I want to use the space? Where do I put the living room? Where do I put the dining room? Where is the kitchen in relation to all of this? Is there another eating nook, for example? How can I make things make sense? So floor plans are the master of all of this. In fact, floor plans are most important and should actually have come first, but it's okay. They can work great here. So think about how you want to arrange things and how things will make sense in that space. A very simple illustration of this would be, let's say you have a kitchen in the back wall. Definitely in the middle isn't going to come in living room and then the dining room. That wouldn't make sense. You want the eating area to be together and then the living area to be further from the eating areas. Nonetheless, you also want to think about negative space. Which areas are not really serving anything for now, and how best can I use those? How best can I make sure that the negative space is working to my advantage and not my disadvantage? And then you can tie it in together with what's going on in that area. So for example, you're in the living area. In the living area, you have a little niche that's empty. You could think about having an extra side table so that when someone is sitting close to there, they can place their drinks. And even if the space allows, then perhaps you can add some more auxiliary seating there so that, when you have guests over, it makes sense. But please do ensure that having room doesn't mean that you should add more furniture, but you just want to play around with things so that it makes sense. A simple way to think about it is even adding plants. You can simply add a nice large tree or a smaller sized tree or even another plant that you like, and you can add it on top of a stool or just on the floor. Just keep things moving. Just analyze really what makes sense with you and in which area am I referring to. And one thing I will point out again here is, please do not put your furniture against the walls, especially in an open plan, because you want to give off the vibes of my furniture is floating in the room, or so to say. But when it's bumped up against the walls, that can easily distort the whole room and also distort the vibe that you're working hard to achieve. The next thing is to make up for lack of wall space. In the last point, I spoke about how to utilize negative space to your advantage. But remember, when you have an open plan, it means that you actually have less wall space to play around with. So this means that somehow you might not be able to hang as much art as you might wanted, or you just have less space to add more things on the walls than you would have in a traditional room that has 4 walls and each zone separated from each other. So this means, for example, it could be too much to wallpaper the whole room and still expect things to make sense with the different zones that you have. For this reason, this is where you have to think of other ways to keep things moving and to keep things interesting visually. This is where you can think about adding a sculptural and displaying that as art. And remember, the good thing about this is it adds variation in height, because you also don't want the furniture to be on the same height. Otherwise, that can give flat and boring. But when you have one sculptural that is tall and other mid-sized elements and then some lower-sized furniture, all of these things will play together to bring in that harmony and those visual cues, which are really interesting for the eye to look at. The next point is to embrace textiles. I spoke about this in my design languages video, how one rug can literally add a ton of things in a space. Number one, it adds the texture element. Number two, it adds color. Number three, it can bring nature into the room because of the material that it's made from. So make sure to play around with textiles. You can have linen on your curtains, and then you can have jute as your rug, and then you can have your fireplace wall with stone. All of these ways are ways that really keep the room interesting. The floor can be made out of wood if you can afford it. And all of these elements, like I mentioned, really make that space interesting. If you really have a great room, as the Americans say, then you might want to utilize curtains there to soften the room and to also absorb some of the echo sounds that might be made in that room. You also want to use rugs. We've spoken about this already. You want to use throws in different areas of the room, also to absorb that sound and also to keep the comfort in the space, and also to just demarcate things, right? Because you'd expect to find a rug in the living area, but not in the dining area. But you can also add curtains to both the dining area and the living area. So this is where the craft comes in and just being creative. And the last tip is to incorporate different kinds of lighting in open spaces. You honestly don't want to rely on one light for the entire room. So in each space, you want to have each dedicated lighting. So for example, in the living area, you would like to have your ambient lighting. Remember, ambient lighting is auxiliary lighting that works just to add depth in a room. So for example, if you have a wall-mounted TV stand, under the TV stand is where you can add an LED lamp, and that works as ambient lighting. And then you might want to add a task lighting for reading, and then of course the general lighting or the overhead lighting that provides lighting in that space. And then in the dining space, again, you want to have a pendant above the dining table, and that will perform the job of task lighting, because whilst you're eating, you want to see your food, of course, but it can also be overhead lighting, so it plays a double role. But nonetheless, you can also add, you can have an art on the wall behind the dining table, and you can mount a picture light over it, and there you go. You have task lighting, you have ambient lighting, all in the same space. One tip to keep in mind would be to coordinate the overhead lighting, because you still want them to be different, but nonetheless, you want them to show that they are in one space, because you wouldn't want them to make too much of a difference, or even worse, to conflict with each other. But you want to create that overall vibe that will make it pleasing to the eye to look at. Again, to wrap it all up, the most important point is that you want to demarcate the different areas within that open space. You do that through floor planning. And then when you demarcated the space, you add variation and interest into the room by using lighting, by using textiles, and by styling. This way, I guarantee you that you will be able to nail whatever look you're going for And remember, if you have any questions or need clarification, remember to just leave a comment down below and I'll personally get back to you.